Interval measurement questions often feel deceptively simple because every method can end in a percentage. The percentage is not the definition. What matters is the rule that creates a yes, the whole interval, any occurrence, or one scheduled instant. We will compare whole interval recording, partial interval recording, momentary time sampling, and continuous measurement with concrete behavior streams and work numbers. Then we will apply those rules across 15 exam-style scenarios. Our free, quick study guide can help you review the distinctions after you finish the practice set. Every discontinuous method converts a behavior stream into yes and no intervals, but the rule for yes changes the meaning of the final percentage. Whole interval asks whether behavior lasted throughout. Partial interval asks whether it happened at least once. Momentary time sampling asks what was happening at a scheduled instant. Before interpreting any percentage, name that rule, then consider interval length, response pattern, and the decision the data must support. Whole interval recording scores yes only when the target behavior occupies the entire interval. If on-task behavior is present for 9 seconds of a 10-second interval and stops during the final second, the score is no. That binary requirement tends to produce a lower estimate of percentage duration, although the amount of error depends on interval length and the behavior's temporal pattern. It does not mean the observer records exact duration. Imagine a 10-second window. Engagement is present at the beginning, continues through the middle, drops out for 1 second, and then returns. Whole interval still records no because the behavior did not fill the complete window. The rule does not ask whether engagement occupied most of the interval or whether it was present at the endpoint. It asks whether one uninterrupted criterion was met from start to finish. The worked example shows why the estimate can be lower. Across 10 10-second intervals, suppose engagement lasts all 10 seconds in 5 intervals and 8 seconds in the other 5. Continuous timing gives 90 seconds of engagement out of 100 or 90%. Whole interval scores only the 5 complete intervals, or 50%. Both numbers use the same observation period, but they preserve different information. Whole interval may be useful when uninterrupted performance is the meaningful criterion and continuous duration is not feasible. It is a poor primary choice for brief, high-rate events when any occurrence or exact count matters. Selection should follow the critical dimension and the consequence of measurement error. The method's usual lower estimate is not a reason to choose it. It is a limitation we must understand when interpreting the result. Partial interval recording scores yes if the behavior occurs at any point during the interval. 1 brief occurrence is enough, and 10 occurrences receive the same binary score. That makes the method sensitive to presence, but unable to recover exact frequency or duration within the interval. For percentage duration, partial interval typically produces a higher estimate, with error again affected by interval length and response pattern. Follow 1 interval from start to finish. Nothing happens at first, the target occurs for 2 seconds in the middle, and then stops. Partial interval records yes because occurrence, not duration, controls the score. The observer must monitor enough of the interval to detect that event. Simply looking at the endpoint would change the recording rule to momentary time sampling. In the second worked example, behavior occurs for 1 second in 8 of 10 10-second intervals. Partial interval produces 8 yes intervals, or 80%. Continuous timing shows only 8 seconds of behavior in a 100-second observation, or 8%. The large difference is not a calculation error. It comes from treating any occurrence as if it represented the whole interval for the binary summary. A partial interval yes compresses very different behavior streams. One response, repeated responses, and behavior lasting 9 seconds can all receive the same score. We can calculate the percentage of yes intervals, but we cannot reconstruct how many responses occurred or how long they lasted. That information loss matters when treatment decisions depend on frequency, duration, or severity rather than simple presence. Momentary time sampling records whether behavior is occurring at a scheduled observation moment. The observer may look only when a timer sounds, or may happen to watch more often, but the data value still depends on the scheduled instant. Behavior that begins, and ends between checks can be missed. Unlike whole and partial interval, MTS error can move in either direction depending on the sampling plan and behavior stream. Think of each timer signal as a snapshot. Activity between snapshots does not directly enter the score. A learner could leave the seat for 20 seconds and be seated at both signals. Both checks would record seated. Conversely, if a long event happens to overlap several checks, the sample percentage may overrepresent the broader session. The schedule of checks therefore affects representativeness. Scheduled snapshots can miss brief events, capture long events repeatedly, or oversample a state that happens to coincide with the signals. More frequent and well-distributed checks generally improve correspondence, but they do not turn MTS into continuous observation. The practical question is whether the sampling plan represents the target well enough for the intended decision. MTS can be feasible when one observer must monitor many learners and continuous observation is unrealistic. It is much less defensible for rare, brief, dangerous behavior when missing a single occurrence matters clinically. Feasibility is part of method selection, not the only criterion. Check frequency, distribution, response duration, and the cost of missed events all belong in the decision. Discontinuous methods sample the behavior stream. Continuous measures preserve the selected occurrence or temporal dimension more directly. Count, rate, duration, latency, or interresponse time. Continuous measurement often requires more observation effort, but the family should be selected from the dimension the decision needs. A percentage from an interval method is not automatically interchangeable with percentage duration from continuous timing. Apply all 4 rules to the same 2-second event in the middle of an interval, absent at the endpoint. Whole interval says no because the behavior did not last throughout. Partial interval says yes because it occurred at least once. Momentary time sampling says no because it was absent at the scheduled check. Continuous duration records 2 seconds. The behavior stream is identical. Only the data-producing rule changes. The comparison table is a translation tool. Whole interval asks the whole time. Partial interval asks at all. MTS asks at the signal. Continuous measurement asks which occurrence or temporal dimension must be preserved. Typical bias and practical fit follow from those rules. If 2 reports both say 60% but use different methods, the numbers summarize different relations and should not be treated as equivalent. Choose the measurement family in a fixed order. First, decide whether a direct measure of occurrence or a temporal dimension is required and feasible. If discontinuous sampling is appropriate, ask whether behavior must fill the interval, occur at any time, or be present only at scheduled moments. Then test the interval length and sampling plan against the behavior's temporal pattern and the consequences of measurement error. We now have the 3 yes rules and the continuous measurement contrast. So, it is time for 15 practice questions. Translate each stem into what the observer records. The whole interval, any occurrence, one scheduled instant, or a direct occurrence or temporal dimension. Keep typical bias separate from the definition and consider what information the method loses. Choose before the explanation applies every option to the same behavior stream. Question 1. During class, a teacher looks up only when a timer sounds every 60 seconds and records whether a student is on task at that exact moment. Which procedure is used? A. Whole interval recording. B. Partial interval recording. C. Momentary time sampling. D. Duration recording. Translate the method into the exact event that produces a recorded yes. Pause briefly and decide which option accounts for every detail. The correct answer is C. Momentary time sampling. Observation occurs only at the scheduled instant. Momentary time sampling scores whether behavior is occurring at the check moment. That is why the timer signal, not the rest of the interval, determines the score. Now, compare the first alternative. Whole interval recording. Whole interval requires behavior throughout the interval. Next, consider another possibility. Partial interval recording. Partial interval monitors any occurrence during the interval. Finally, look at the remaining option. Duration recording. Duration measures how long behavior lasts. Exact scheduled check means MTS. Question 2. A 10-second interval is scored yes only when on-task behavior continues for all 10 seconds. Which method is used? A. Partial interval recording. B. Whole interval recording. C. Momentary time sampling. D. Event recording. Apply the scoring rule to the entire behavior stream before estimating what the percentage means. Take a moment to choose, and be ready to name the evidence that decides it. Choose B. Whole interval recording. A yes score requires behavior for the full interval. Any interruption makes the interval a no. The principle underneath that decision is this. Whole interval recording uses an all-or-none duration requirement across the interval. Begin with the first contrast. Partial interval recording. Partial interval requires only one occurrence. The second contrast raises a different issue. Momentary time sampling. MTS checks only one moment. Complete the comparison with the last alternative. Event recording. Event recording counts responses continuously. Whole time means whole interval. Question 3. A therapist marks an interval yes if hand biting occurs at least once, even for 1 second. Which method is used? A. Partial interval recording. B. Whole interval recording. C. Momentary time sampling. D. Latency recording. Separate the definition of the recording method from its typical measurement bias. Make your selection before the explanation appears. A. Partial interval recording is the best answer. Start with the decisive detail. Any occurrence during the interval produces a yes. From there, partial interval records whether behavior happened at any point in the interval. The response does not need to last or be present at the endpoint. Set the evidence beside the first alternative. Whole interval recording. Whole interval requires continuous occurrence. Then check the next one. Momentary time sampling. MTS checks only at a designated moment. There is one last option to examine. Latency recording. Latency measures delay to response onset. At all during the interval means partial interval. Question 4. A behavior occurs briefly in almost every interval. If the partial interval percentage is interpreted as an estimate of percentage duration, which bias is most likely? A. Underestimation of percentage duration. B. Overestimation of percentage duration. C. Exact estimation of percentage duration. D. Measurement of latency. Ask whether the observer scores duration across an interval, any occurrence, or one scheduled instant. Stop here long enough to test each choice against the stem. The stem supports B. Overestimation of percentage duration. Partial interval percentages typically overestimate percentage duration when yes intervals are treated as time engaged. The stem supplies exactly that relation. Every brief occurrence turns the entire interval into a yes. The percentage of yes intervals is not the actual percentage of time occupied by behavior. First, read the opening alternative against the stem. Underestimation of percentage duration. Whole interval percentages more typically show this directional bias. From there, assess the next choice. Exact estimation of percentage duration. Partial interval scores do not equal exact percentage duration. Finish by testing the final choice. Measurement of latency. No cue-to-response delay is measured. Partial interval percentage typically overestimates percentage duration. Question 5. A student is on task for 9 of every 10 seconds, but each interval contains a brief interruption. Whole interval recording is used. What is likely? A. The whole interval percentage overestimates the percentage duration of on-task behavior. B. The method records exact duration. C. The whole interval percentage underestimates the percentage duration of on-task behavior. D. The method becomes event recording. Compare the high continuous engagement with the method's all 10 seconds scoring criterion. Choose one answer now. The next page will compare all 4. Our answer is C. The whole interval percentage underestimates the percentage duration of on-task behavior. What the answer must explain is that a brief interruption turns each interval into a no. The all-interval requirement is stricter than actual time engaged. This follows because whole interval percentages typically understate high but imperfect sustained engagement relative to continuous percentage duration. One alternative takes a different route. The whole interval percentage overestimates the percentage duration of on-task behavior. The typical directional bias is downward, not upward, for percentage duration estimates. Another route changes the relation. The method records exact duration. Exact duration is not measured. The remaining route deserves the same check. The method becomes event recording. The scoring rule remains discontinuous. Whole interval percentages typically underestimate percentage duration. Question 6. A BCBA must know the exact number of elopement attempts because each attempt creates immediate safety risk. Which measurement approach best fits? A. Momentary time sampling. B. Partial interval recording. C. Whole interval recording. D. Continuous event recording. Because every attempt matters, decide whether a sampling method can preserve the exact response count. Commit to an answer before we reveal the reasoning. The best supported choice is D. Continuous event recording. The key evidence is not a label, but a relation. Every occurrence must be captured accurately. Continuous event recording directly counts each discrete response. As a result, sampling could miss clinically important events. Check the fit of the first alternative. Momentary time sampling. MTS can miss behavior between checks. Move on to the next choice. Partial interval recording. Partial interval loses the exact count. Close the set with the last one. Whole interval recording. Whole interval is poorly matched to brief events. When every response matters, prefer continuous measurement. Question 7. A team needs the total number of minutes a tantrum lasts in each session. Which measure is most direct? A. Duration recording. B. Partial interval recording. C. Momentary time sampling. D. Frequency recording. Decide what information this method preserves and what information it necessarily discards. Give yourself a short pause and identify the decisive relation. This is A. Duration recording. It preserves the dimension the team actually needs. The deciding support comes from the stem. The question asks for total time engaged. Duration directly measures how long behavior lasts. Against the same facts, consider the first alternative. Partial interval recording. Partial interval provides sampled occurrence, not total minutes. The evidence also bears on the next choice. Momentary time sampling. MTS samples moments only. One more comparison remains. Frequency recording. Frequency counts episodes, but not their length. Select the procedure that preserves the critical dimension. Question 8. A student leaves the seat for 20 seconds between two timer signals, but is seated at both signals. How will momentary time sampling score those two checks? A. Both checks are yes for out-of-seat behavior. B. One yes and one no. C. The method records 20 seconds. D. Both checks are no for out-of-seat behavior. Score only the moments or intervals the procedure defines, even if other behavior is described. Select the best answer, not simply the first true statement. Answer D. Both checks are no for out-of-seat behavior. Fits the full relation. Read the evidence and rule together. The target is absent at both scheduled observation moments. MTS ignores what happens between checks when scoring those moments. That combination supports the selected option. Take the first option on its own terms. Both checks are yes for out-of-seat behavior. Occurrence between checks does not create a yes. Now turn toward the second alternative. One yes and one no. Neither scheduled check captures the target. At the end, examine the remaining choice. The method records 20 seconds. MTS does not record exact duration. MTS can miss behavior occurring between observations. Question 9. One teacher must monitor 24 students while teaching. The goal is an estimate of group on-task behavior without continuous observation. Which method is most feasible? A. Continuous duration recording for every student. B. Momentary time sampling at scheduled signals. C. Latency recording after every instruction. D. Permanent product measurement. Keep occurrence, duration, and sample presence distinct while you evaluate the options. Hold your choice and check whether it explains the complete scenario. The correct answer is B. Momentary time sampling at scheduled signals. The teacher needs brief, scheduled observations across many learners. Once that fact is established, feasibility fits the environmental constraint, but scheduling signals does not guarantee representativeness. MTS is the most feasible listed method and can provide a representative estimate when checks are sufficiently frequent and appropriately distributed. Start the option check here. Continuous duration recording for every student. Continuous duration is unrealistic for one teacher and 24 students. Continue the check with another possibility. Latency recording after every instruction. Latency measures a different dimension. End the check with the last possibility. Permanent product measurement. No durable product represents on-task behavior. MTS feasibility still requires sufficiently frequent, well-distributed checks. Question 10. During one interval, behavior occurs for 2 seconds in the middle and is absent at the end. Which scoring pattern is correct? A. Whole yes, partial yes, MTS yes. B. Whole no, partial no, MTS yes. C. Whole yes, partial no, MTS no. D. Whole no, partial yes, MTS no. Score the same 2-second event separately under the whole interval, partial interval, and end of interval rules. Pause the video if you need more time to work through the options. Choose D. Whole no, partial yes, MTS no. The item turns on one concrete feature. Behavior is brief, not continuous, and absent at the check moment. The same stream produces no, yes, no under the 3 rules. In functional terms, whole requires the full interval. Partial requires any occurrence. MTS uses the endpoint check. The first nearby alternative needs a boundary check. Whole yes, partial yes, MTS yes. Whole and MTS requirements are not met. A second alternative depends on another distinction. Whole no, partial no, MTS yes. Partial should be yes because behavior occurred. The last alternative completes the set. Whole yes, partial no, MTS no. Whole cannot be yes when behavior lasted only 2 seconds. Apply each scoring rule separately to the same interval. Question 11. Across a 10-second interval, a learner is engaged for the first 9 seconds and disengaged for the final second. How was the interval scored under whole interval recording? A. Yes, because engagement occupied most of the interval. B. No, because engagement did not last the entire interval. C. Yes, only if the final second is observed. D. The interval is divided into 9 yes scores. Compare the 9 seconds observed with the method's all or none requirement for the full interval. Choose now, then compare your evidence with the explanation. B. No, because engagement did not last the entire interval is the best answer. Whole interval records yes only when the target persists throughout the complete interval. Here, the confirming detail is that 1 second fails the all interval requirement. Majority duration is irrelevant to the binary scoring rule. Put the first choice next to the deciding fact. Yes, because engagement occupied most of the interval. Most of the interval is not enough. Now, place the next choice beside that fact. Yes, only if the final second is observed. Endpoint-only observation describes MTS. Finally, test the last choice against the full relation. The interval is divided into 9 yes scores. One interval receives 1 score. For whole interval, 9 of 10 seconds is still no. Question 12. In one interval, shouting occurs once. In another, it occurs 8 times. Both intervals are scored yes with partial interval recording. Which response count detail cannot be recovered from these 2 scores? A. The exact number of responses within each interval. B. Whether behavior occurred at all. C. Whether the interval had a defined length. D. Which observer collected data. Compare the observed behavior with the recording criterion, not with an intuitive summary of the session. Take a quiet moment to test the 4 conditions against the STEM. The STEM supports A. The exact number of responses within each interval. Begin with what the STEM actually shows. 1 and 8 responses receive the same binary score. The percentage of yes intervals cannot recover the exact response count. The broader rule is this. Partial interval preserves occurrence, but not within interval frequency. It also loses exact duration. Read the stem alongside the first alternative. Whether behavior occur at all. Occurrence is precisely what the yes score preserves. Use the same criterion on the next one. Whether the interval had a defined length. Interval duration can still be defined. Apply that criterion once more to the final option. Which observer collected data? Observer identity is unrelated to the scoring rule. A partial interval, yes, compresses all within interval activity. Question 13. An observer continuously watches during each 30-second interval, but records yes only if behavior is occurring when the timer sounds. Which procedure is actually defined by the recording rule? A. Partial interval recording. B. Whole interval recording. C. Momentary time sampling. D. Continuous duration recording. Look for whether brief events, sustained behavior, or between check changes create the central trap. Decide which choice is fully supported before moving on. Our answer is C. Momentary time sampling. The recorded score depends only on behavior at the scheduled moment. That observation narrows the field immediately. Procedure labels follow the scoring rule, even if the observer happens to watch more than required. Between signal observation does not change an endpoint-only score into partial interval. For the first contrast, take the opening choice. Partial interval recording. Partial interval would score any occurrence. For the next contrast, use the second alternative. Whole interval recording. Whole interval would require continuous occurrence. For the final contrast, question 14. A brief head strike may occur between scheduled checks, and every occurrence requires an immediate safety response. Which option is most likely to miss these events, and is therefore least defensible as the primary measure? A. Continuous event recording. B. A direct count with clear response definitions. C. Momentary time sampling. D. Continuous observation with event recording. Focus on whether the procedure can detect a brief safety event that occurs between scheduled observations. Make one selection and identify how each option would capture or miss the event described. The best supported choice is C. Momentary time sampling. The choice succeeds because it accounts for this fact. A brief event can occur in between observation moments. MTS can miss rare, short, high-risk responses because it samples only scheduled instance. Feasibility does not outweigh the need to detect every safety-relevant occurrence. Compare the first alternative with the stem. Continuous event recording. Continuous event recording is defensible because it captures each strike, so it cannot be the least defensible option. Now compare the next choice with the same evidence. A direct count with clear response definitions. A direct count is defensible because the clear definition supports scoring every strike. It is not the least defensible option. Use the stem once more on the final alternative. Continuous observation with event recording. Continuous observation with event recording directly detects each strike, so it is not the least defensible option. Sampling risk matters most when missing one event matters clinically. Question 15. One observer reports 60% using partial interval. Another reports 60% using whole interval. Why should the percentages not be treated as interchangeable? A. The procedures use different rules for a yes and have different bias patterns. B. Whole and partial interval are mathematically identical. C. Only MTS produces percentages. D. A percentage automatically equals exact duration. Before comparing the two percentages, state the different yes rule that produced each one. Pause here and follow the sequence once more before answering. This is A. The procedures use different rules for a yes and have different bias patterns. The method name is necessary to interpret the number. The decisive evidence is this. The same percentage comes from different scoring contingencies. Partial records any occurrence. Whole requires occurrence throughout, so their percentages represent different summaries. Bring in the first alternative for comparison. Whole and partial interval are mathematically identical. Their yes rules are not identical. Add the next choice to the comparison. Only MTS produces percentages. All 3 sampling procedures can yield percentages. Complete the set with the final option. A percentage automatically equals exact duration. Interval percentages are not automatically exact duration. Never interpret an interval percentage without its scoring rule. Before we finish, compress the lesson into 4 decisions. First, whole. Yes, only for the entire interval. Second, partial. Yes, for any occurrence. Third, MTS. Yes, only at the scheduled moment. Finally, continuous. Directly measure count, rate, or time. These are not isolated memory lines. They're the sequence we can use when a new scenario changes the surface details. Keep the momentum going with our 2 free study resources. Use the free BCBA mock exam to test whether today's distinctions transfer to a longer set of questions. Then use the free quick study guide to revisit any concept that still feels close to a distractor. Both complete links are written on screen, so you can open the resource you need without trying to copy an address from the narration. Thanks for studying with us, and we will see you in the next BCBA exam lesson.